Digital sculpting may seem intimidating, but it's actually very, very easy and very, very powerful. So I highly recommend, no matter what you do, don't do without this. We're going to go in with this object selected. It's already been remeshed. It has a polygon count of about 3.3 million. We're going to go into its sculpt mode. This will populate the sidebar with a bunch of sculpting tools. And of course, you can just experiment with these in a number of different ways. But I'll just really quickly go through some of the most important ones, and then I'll show you how to mess this up pretty quick in a great way. So the first brush is just the Sculpt Draw brush, which will essentially just lump up a bit of material on the mesh, which is great for blocking out form and making quick adjustments. The other really useful one here in the blue set is the Inflate brush, and it does exactly what it says it's going to do. I'm going to use the radius control here to increase that radius, but it puffs the mesh up and helps you fill in gaps. Below here is the Smooth brush, which between inflating and smoothing you can actually do quite a lot. And what you'll find is that you are going to be using the Smooth brush quite a lot. And so it is actually on a hotkey, so if you hold Shift, you'll enter into the Smooth brush with any brush selected, which is amazing for smoothing out the transitions between different kit bash parts. Really, you could do most things with just that pairing of brushes. Now, I will use the Inflate brush to create some new areas of mass and close up some of these gaps. The Inflate brush is incredible for closing gaps and is one of the main uses for the brush. I'm just going to puff these parts up, make this connection a little more obvious. Now, here where these meshes were not subdivided, they have polygons showing on their curves, and I would like to smooth those out because they will be very visible otherwise. So I would take a second to just use the Smooth brush to again smooth the transitions between the parts and to smooth the parts themselves. Now these would be less janked up if I had increased the resolution, but this mesh already has a lot of polygons, so to make it easy to work with, I actually just said it's alright. But in general, you want to favor what looks really good, and while this doesn't look great, I think it looks okay. So I'll be using things like the Inflate brush now, where I see that this part is floating off of the main body. I want those to be connected, so I'm going to actually just puff that together a bit in this one as well, because I will eventually be 3D printing this, and I need it to be a single piece. Now, I'm noticing because of this setup that I'm not totally crazy about this resolution, and I'm going to actually need to push it farther. Maybe before that, I'll make a few more modifications though. And another really great brush to do modifications with is the Snake Hook. Now, the Snake Hook allows you to make very invasive changes very quickly. You can do things like twisting and pulling and rapidly making big moves and changes. I'm not going to do that particularly, but another really great way to do this is actually via the brushes in the Blender kit, which I will actually sort here. And you'll find a number of brushes in this kit that are free. What they allow you to do are rapidly add things like texture or geometry to your sculpture. So in this case, for example, if I select this Dragon Scale brush, it will download and add it to my draw brush. And now, if I click and drag, I can actually just add that directly to the mesh, which looks pretty nice. I'm going to come through here and browse a little bit more. I'll grab a texturizer. So this is more of a VDM brush, a three-dimensional geometry brush, but you also will find some that are more textural, more like an applique or a surface treatment. So I'll scroll through, and there's a bunch of really good ones in here. I'll use this Excretions brush, which this will use the Inflate, but will quickly texturize with a new texture. You can use this really effectively on these rocks. It's important to note that these brushes are going to be very polygon count dependent, and they will take the resolution based off of the polygon count of the mesh you're using. So if they don't look at full scale or full resolution, it's because the polygon count isn't high enough. Now, I'm actually going to increase the polygon count further, and to do that, mostly for, as I'm looking at the hands, they look a little rough. I'm going to first zoom out and hit the R key, which this is actually the voxel scale. So if I move my mouse to the left or right, I had typed in previously 0.08 in the remesh tool. So I'm going to go a little lower to 0.007. And then you press Control R, and this will remesh the model. It's going to take a moment though, as my mouse is frozen. And voila, it has remeshed the model. It is slightly higher resolution. It has a few more polygons added, and it does look a bit better actually. But I'm going to play around with this a little bit more, and I'm going to get the mesh count slightly higher so that this looks a little bit cleaner. So I'm going to go to 0.006. Okay, so now the mesh is slightly higher resolution, and that's all well and good. Now, let's say I want to make some additional changes, and I have my own texture brush that I would like to use. If that's the case, what I'll actually do is go into the draw brush and select its first default brush, and now I will go into the bottom right to the texture properties, and I will add a new texture to the Blender scene. I have a folder on my desktop with a number of these, and I have a good folder here where I have a collection of alien skin, and I want to use, for example, starfish skin, or let's do dead coral. This is a height map texture. This was generated in the substance package, and if I want to use this in a brush, all I need to do with the brush selected is go into texture and pick that brush, and now if I am to click on the model, it will apply that texture to the model itself. I'm going to smooth this out. I'm not crazy about using this particular texture too much though. I'm going to grab the chicken bone, which I like much better. This is a really great way to quickly add detail to a model because, as you'll see, the chicken bone texture is just adding some really light roughness to the material. And I quite like that, especially for something when it's akin to a sculpture or a character. Now, I could carry on and do things like smoothing and changing this area via the sculpting tools, but I'm actually pretty happy with how this is turning out. And we'll say that for now maybe this character is good to go. I've noticed I'm not really a fan of how this point is merging together. So what I'll need to do is use the inflate brush to clean that up. And then what we actually need to do is remesh it again, really, to get the changes from the inflate brush to take full effect. So I will actually do one final remesh at a higher resolution. 0.05 seems good. And now we're going to move on to the next step, which will actually involve exporting this model